Are you craving more NFL trades? I know I am, so let's spice things up and go make some fantasy trades that real GMs were too scared to make. I've got some buys and some sell options for you this week. We are inching closer and closer to the fantasy playoffs, and perhaps your team needs to make a push that puts you in prime position for the playoffs, or maybe you're on track and you just need to make one or two moves to really reinforce your lineup or your bench for that championship run. I've got buys and sells for you. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Everybody and their mother was traded away from the Jets today, and Breece Hall was somehow the one person who did want out but was left out in the cold and is stuck with the Jets now. But perhaps that presents a little bit of an opportunity for us as fantasy managers, because Breece Hall is coming off that massive performance against Cincinnati where he had 18 carries for 133 yards and 3 total touchdowns, looking like the exact running back that we always knew he was. But since then, there's been a bye week. And then again, of course, we've got this letdown of the Jets not trading him away. So this shouldn't actually be buying him at peak value right now. Because fantasy managers rostering Breece Hall, they likely didn't love the situation. They were patiently waiting, wanting for that trade to come through. Unfortunately, the Jets, they were just being really stingy. And Hall has been a bit of a frustrating roster because the Jets are a terrible team. But Hall has been fantastic. Yes, there have been some down games, of course, but everyone has had down games, even Jonathan Taylor. But those have typically been bad matchups like Tampa Bay and Denver. And while it did literally take him until week 8 to get a touchdown, he was still producing from a fantasy perspective. Even excluding the week 8 fantasy bonanza, weeks 1 through 7, Hall was RB 18 in average fantasy points per game without getting a single touchdown. He's a very stable RB2 in spite of the Jets' ineptitude, and there are still some run-friendly matchups here down the line, and with the letdown of the lack of the trade, you can scoop in and grab him now way lower than his actual value. Now, hear me out on this one because I am fully aware that this sounds counterintuitive. Everyone has Jameson Williams as a sell high right now. Everyone knows that he is an extremely volatile player, and Detroit's offense just hasn't functioned the same way since Ben Johnson left. So if everybody knows this, wouldn't this be an interesting time to creep in and buy him on the cheap? Williams has actually been a very boom-bust player for his entire career, but this season has been on an extreme level. He has had 3 double-digit fantasy performances and 5 below 10 fantasy points, and that includes a 0 fantasy point game. Someone whose floor is literally 0 is never a good thing, so why am I advocating for trading for Jameson Williams? Because the fantasy manager that has him likely wants nothing to do with him and will sell him for a bag of peanuts. And there is a good chance that the person who rosters him has a record below 500 if they have been rolling him out on a weekly basis there. So if you're a strong team heading to the playoffs and you don't actually need Williams as a starter, you can get him and reinforce your bench with a player that has upside. Because that's ultimately what we want to start doing here. Filling out our benches with high upside options, boom players, and handcuffs that are in strong offenses. Williams' playoff schedule is another reason to stash him here because those games are potential boom games. He has a matchup with the Rams, a team that usually forces teams to have to push extreme pass volume because their offense is so strong. Then Pittsburgh, we have talked about this a lot. They are extremely vulnerable to the pass. And then a championship week that is a rematch with a Minnesota defense that has been struggling and that he just had 16 fantasy points again. So again, this is a risky move. It's a very specific move, but it is a cheap move that can pay off at the end of the season if you need to plug in a big upside play in your fantasy lineups in the playoffs. The general perception of DK Metcalf makes him a great buy low candidate here after a frustrating performance of just 2 receptions on 4 targets for 6 yards. Ugh. The production was disappointing, especially on a day where Aaron Rodgers threw the ball 35 times. Metcalf should have had more volume. However, Indianapolis's defense has been quietly doing a very solid job of limiting opposing wide receiver ones. It's just kind of gone unnoticed because they have faced several teams with very questionable quarterback situations and receiving cores. Calvin Austin does appear to be locked in as the wide receiver 2 here, but DK Metcalf remains the unquestioned wide receiver 1. The only issue here is that we are seeing a shift in heavy targets to the tight ends because for some reason Pittsburgh wants to hoard an absurd amount of them still. In more pass-friendly matchups for wide receiver 1s, we will see an uptick in volume from Metcalf, and matchups are the key here. The Steelers face the LA Chargers next week, followed by Cincinnati, Chicago, Buffalo, Baltimore, Miami, and Detroit, with the only real tough matchup coming in Week 17 against Cleveland. For the most part, this is a very pass-friendly schedule, so we can buy low now on DK Metcalf. After next week's matchup, he should settle into a very stable wide receiver too. He came into the season with the expectation here that we would have big volume for Metcalf, and it's been frustrating not getting that. It hasn't panned out exactly how we wanted it, but Metcalf has still hit double digit fantasy points in PPR in every game but two this season. He has shown both stability and generally a good floor and a high ceiling. He's a good buy here. Now, this isn't a buy low, it is a buy now while you can. The person selling RJ Harvey might think that they're selling high here, but his current value is actually extremely reasonable. You can get him maybe for a Jacoby Myers or a Romeo Dobbs. J.K. Dobbins is still the lead back here in both snaps and carries. That is very clear. However, the lack of trust that we saw earlier in the season with Harvey appears to be just completely disappeared. He has posted back-to-back strong performances, one against Dallas, that is very expected, and then another against Houston. That's a strong defense where he thrived through the air with 5 receptions on 5 targets for 51 yards and a touchdown. Over the past 3 games, Harvey has scored 2 touchdowns on the ground and 3 through the air. That is incredible here, and we have to pay attention to that. While Dobbins does appear to be operating as the clear lead back here, he hasn't scored since week 5. That is a major problem, and one of the reasons why we liked Harvey, even with Dobbins leading the backfield as we anticipated, is because Dobbins has a lengthy injury history. He has missed at least 4 games in every season outside of his rookie season, with last year's 13 games being the most that he has played since that rookie campaign. Now, we are seeing this clear increase in Harvey's role, particularly in the red zone. You pair that with the risk of Dobbins' potential injury here, this is a great time to buy in anticipation of where this backfield is heading. It's very similar to Kareem Hunt when he became the clear preferred red zone option over Isaiah Pacheco, or Zach Charbonnet being the one who clearly is the preferred red zone option over Kenneth Walker. It's time that we start looking at RJ Harvey's role with a little bit more respect. Apparently, the Raiders' offensive problems were literally just the absence of Brock Bowers, because Bowers came back to full health and he literally made up for 3 missed games in one single outing. With that success came more production for Ashton Jeanty. It wasn't perfect, but it is very understandable given Jacksonville's run defense. They're a very stout defense, and that is kind of underselling it because no running back has exceeded 57 rushing yards on the Jags this season. So Ashton Jeanty getting 42 yards on the ground on 13 carries really isn't an issue here, especially when he made up for it through the air with 5 receptions for 47 yards and a touchdown. Geno Smith arguably looked the best he has all season, so why are we selling him? Well, we are selling him because there's both good and bad here. The good is that, yeah, he's an RB1. That is clear. No one is stealing his job. There's no threat to his workload. But the bad here is that the Raiders have arguably the worst strength of schedule outlooks in the league. Like, very, very clearly there. They faced Denver, Dallas, a Dallas defense who, by the way, trades, they are reinforcing their defense, so they might look a little bit different here soon. Cleveland, the Chargers, Denver again, Philadelphia, who is also reinforcing their defense, Houston, and then the Giants in week 17. So we're just kind of selling because overall, this is a kind of a brutal stretch here. You don't have to abandon ship. We're not like selling him for a bag of peanuts here. If you can't afford to lose him, then hold on to him. But if you have depth at running back, now is the perfect time to sell high here because there's a general positive feeling around him. He is a clear RB1, and fantasy managers are desperate for an RB1 with all the injuries, and people are very willing to pay up for him. So we talked about buying Jameson Williams. Now I want to talk about selling Sam LaPorta, and you're probably looking at me like I'm crazy, like, Tara, wait, what is the logic here? Why are we buying Jameson Williams and why are we selling Sam LaPorta? So let's talk through it. Hear me out here. LaPorta has been also a very popular sell high candidate, but the difference between him and Jameson is that LaPorta's name holds actual water. People like and trust him. They don't see him for as boom bust as they do with Jameson Williams. People want to get rid of Jameson Williams. There's not that same perception around Sam LaPorta. I recommend selling LaPorta because he is the big shiny name with strong trade value on a reputation and the fact that he has had a tight end 1 overall finish. People trust him, so it is far easier to sell him above value than Jameson Williams, where you are scooping him up on the cheap. So again, this one is not a must sell. This is not a bailout panic situation here because, as I mentioned, the playoff schedule is nice. But I've noticed a recent trend here. I do a ton of start sit shows throughout the week, a lot for fantasy pros, and I see a lot of trade questions and a lot of start sit questions. And a lot of start sit questions this past week were about flexing tight ends, and often that included Sam LaPorta. At this point, there have been so many tight ends that have emerged on the waiver wire, and everyone has been grabbing him up that a lot of teams have two very startable options here. And because we are seeing underwhelming performances at other positions, particularly at running back, which is so incredibly thin, if you roster Sam LaPorta and you have another viable option in Aronde Gadsden, you can sell Sam LaPorta and upgrade at another position. When we're looking at LaPorta, he is actually one of my favorite to predict in terms of his boom bust games because he doesn't really have mediocre performances. They're left definitely single digit performances or ones where he is heaving up 15 to 20 fantasy points, and you can kind of spot the boom games. They're easy to predict there. So again, this is not a move that you have to make to absolutely get off him, but if you've got two tight ends and you trust the other guy and you want to capitalize on selling Sam LaPorta at peak value for good value here, you can sell him after this boom game. This is the perfect opportunity to do it. DJ Moore's name still holds enough value here. He is another sell high here based off his value, and you can sell him high off of this performance. We want to sell him because he often disappears in this offense, even in good matchups. Now, this week, Moore got it done in every possible way as a receiver, as a runner, as a quarterback. Very versatile here. We will see these types of creative performances from time and time again, but is that something that you can absolutely bank on? No, not on a weekly basis here. Now, outside of this game, DJ Moore hasn't exceeded 12 fantasy points at all this season, which is extremely underwhelming considering where he was drafted and what we expected of him. Caleb Williams has been very inconsistent, and with so many mouths to feed in this offense, plus the run game thriving, hello, Kyle Monangai, and DeAndre Swift has been excellent as well. It's become kind of a crapshoot, trying to hope that any Chicago receiver delivers consistently. Sell high on DJ Moore. Do not take this as a sign that things are turning around and he's going to have a strong second half of the season. Now, I will say this. It is very possible that he has a strong performance this next week because the Bears face the Giants. They are very beat up on defense. And then again, he has Minnesota, Pittsburgh. So there are positive matchups coming off. I'm not saying that overall this is something that you have to panic sell right now, but this is the perfect opportunity to do so rather than risk it and see if he does end up hitting in these next matchups. Also, his playoff schedule does not help him out here either. The matchups are against Cleveland, Green Bay, in San Francisco, who can play up from time to time there. Moore has lacked upside all season, and this is the perfect opportunity to get out while you can. We just got a report, literally right before I started filming this video, that Kyler Murray is not benched per se, but they think that his recovery is going to take a little bit longer. Now, I mean, we can maybe read between the lines there. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. We don't really care. For our purposes, it sounds like we are getting Jacoby Brissett for a decent amount of time here. So this is a perfect time to sell high on Marvin Harrison Jr. The Cardinals offense looked fantastic on Monday night, but please don't forget that was against Dallas. This pre-trade Dallas with the bad defense. Offenses look fantastic against the Cowboys in general. Marvin Harrison Jr. just has not been a stable wide receiver one yet, but you can use this recency bias to your advantage here. On the surface, it appears that Jacoby Myers might be the Cardinals' savior offensively, but he has been the starter for 3 games, and 2 of those games, Marvin Harrison Jr. had 5 and 7 fantasy points. Now, to be fair, one of those games was the concussion game, so we truly don't actually have enough sample size here to say that Marvin Harrison Jr. is on the right track for perfection wide receiver one here with Jacoby Brissett. And regardless of the quarterback situation, the issue at quarterback might be an issue for the Cardinals, but that is not actually Marvin Harrison Jr.'s problem. It's not the quarterback. His problem is Trey McBride. When you have a tight end that out-targets you 75 to 50, your upside is just naturally capped. The offense naturally runs through McBride. There are obviously instances on other teams where you can have a target leading type of tight end and a wide receiver one that is reliable go together, but that often requires a high-end quarterback situation, which again brings us back to the quarterback issue. Now, to be clear, this is not a sell him below cost situation. You don't have to bail out here. This is not a bag of peanuts. I will let you know if a guy is a bag of peanuts sale here. If you don't get the right offer, you don't have to make it, but at the end of the day, we're not trading away the wide receiver one of a team for pennies, unless it's the Raiders here. But this is a good opportunity to trade Marvin Harrison Jr., capitalize off of all of this news, and try and upgrade somewhere else. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Tara Time, and make sure that you're subscribed and tuned in. I have live Q&As every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST, and I've got videos dropping all the time, waiver wire ads, stashes, and so much more. So make sure that you are locked in this fantasy season with me.